Happy Monday, everybody. Dr. Peter Glidden here with another live edition of Fire Your MD Now. It's Influenza Week all week long. We're going to be talking about different aspects of the flu, helping to give you knowledge which will give you power to make correct decisions which will actually produce a noticeable, measurable, positive change in your life and, increase your chances of having a positive health outcome when your body is stressed out, in this case, by the influenza virus. So I'm going to ask you to hold your calls until after the second segment, so give me a half an hour to talk about the stuff I need to talk about today, and then I'll take calls in the last half of the show, and then the entire second segment. All right? So now, there are a number of things to understand when it comes to the influenza virus. The first and most, I think, the best place to launch is the simple question, how effective is the flu vaccine? Because when you turn on the paper, when you open turn on the TV, open a newspaper, open a magazine, it's all about the flu vaccine and how, they're pushing the flu vaccine as much as they possibly can. Well, according to the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, how well the flu vaccine works can range widely from season to season and can also vary depending on who is being vaccinated. At least two factors play an important role in determining the likelihood that the influenza vaccine will protect a person from the flu. Number one, the age and the health of the person, and number two, how well the vaccine matches the actual virus that person was exposed to. Now, during years when the viruses in the vaccine and the circulating viruses are not well matched, it is possible that no benefit from vaccination may be observed. I'm reading this right from the Center for Disease Control. Can you believe they actually said that? During years when the virus in the vaccine and the circulating viruses are well matched, it's possible to measure substantial benefits from vaccination in terms of preventing influenza illness. However, I quote, even during years when the vaccine match is very good, the benefits of vaccination will vary across the population, depending on characteristics of the person being vaccinated and even potentially which vaccine was used, okay? So the Center for Disease Control comes right out and says, look, there's two things that are important here. Who is being vaccinated? And by the way, the research clearly shows that if you're under 2 years of age or elderly, the flu vaccine is worthless. I mean, it just doesn't work. So if you're worried about giving the flu vaccine to your child who's under 2 years of age, don't do it because it doesn't work. It doesn't work, nor does it work when given to the elderly. It just doesn't work. It's a waste of time and a waste of money. Now, this is very interesting, right? Because even when there's a good match between what's in the vaccine and the flu virus that's going around, sometimes it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Right now, the Center for Disease Control has isolated 527 strains. 527 strains of the influenza virus, and there are 3 of them in the vaccine that you're given. The flu vaccine has 3 of the strains. There are 527 they've currently identified. So the chance that the flu that you get infected with, the virus that you're infected with, is the same virus that's in the vaccine, well, your chances are 3 out of 527, 537. Those aren't very good odds. Now, to give the devil his due, there have been some research studies that have shown that even when there's not a good match, the vaccine has been effective. But, what these studies all take into consideration, there's an a priori built-in myth that informs all of the research that's done with vaccinations. There is a built-in myth that informs all of the work that's done with vaccinations, and here's the myth, okay? When there's an epidemic disease going around like the flu, I guess that's the best example, right? The flu or HIV. The thing about this is that what scientists look at is a small percentage. They only look at the people who got sick. They only look at the people who got sick. And they test the people who got sick as to, well, if you're sick and it's flu season and you're part of their cohort study, they test you. They'll bring you into the lab and they'll test your blood or your saliva or your sputum to see whether or not the influenza virus is present in your system. They never do that with healthy people. They never do that with healthy people. And the accepted myth here is that the presence of the virus in the system therefore makes you sick. And they've never been able to prove that. Nobody has ever proven that, once you have the virus in your system, it's a death sentence, or not a death sentence, it's a flu sentence, and that what's necessary for someone to get sick is simply to introduce the influenza virus into their system. Once the virus is in the system, you're going to have the flu. They've never proven that that's the way that it is, because they've never taken 200 people, divided them randomly into two groups, randomly by age, just randomly, so that there's no segregation there appropriate for age or height or body weight or pre-existing diseases. They've never done a study where they've taken a couple of hundred people and injected half of them with the influenza virus, or exposed half to the influenza virus, and the other they didn't, and see what happens to both groups. They've never done that. Of course, you could say that would be unethical, but they've never done that in monkeys either. So, simple exposure to the influenza virus has never been proven to give you the flu. And when you get the influenza virus, even if it's a match, if you're elderly, or if you're a child, or if you're 40% of the general population, the vaccine isn't going to work. So what's going on? Well, nobody knows what's going on. Because when it comes to immunology, it is the blind leading the blind. It's the blind leading the blind. Now, again, from the CDC, is the flu vaccine effective against all types of flu and cold virus? Quote, influenza vaccines protect against infection and illness caused by the 3 influenza viruses in the vaccine. And the CDC guesses. Because remember, this stuff is manufactured, and millions of vials of this stuff are manufactured before flu season. So what do? They go to China, they go to Europe, and they gather strains of people who were sick with the flu, and then they guess which ones are going to be present in you or me in the United States the following flu season. Well, that's a pretty big leap, don't you think? And which is one of the reasons why, at best, the flu vaccine is, maybe 50% effective, although I doubt even those statistics, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So, here's the deal. And again, I'm reading directly from the Center for Disease Control. Lost my place here. Here we go. During outbreaks of respiratory illness when influenza is suspected, some respiratory samples should be tested both by rapid test and by viral culture. The collection of some respiratory samples for viral culture is essential for determining the influenza A subtypes and the influenza A and B strains causing illness, and for surveillance of new strains that may be needed to include it in next year's influenza vaccine. See, it's a giant guesswork. They're guessing. They're running around, and it is impossible to predict which flu virus is actually going to show up next year. You can't do it. And the vaccines are manufactured the year before. So it is a gigantic crapshoot. And quite frankly, the only reason that it's done, in my opinion, is because it's a big cash cow for the pharmaceutical industry. Millions, billions of dollars. $2.8 billion. $2.8 billion was how much money the pharmaceutical industry made by producing the vaccine for this year, just the flu vaccine. A vaccination, generally speaking, is a $20 billion a year industry. Of that $20 billion in profit, 2.8, it's almost $3 billion, is from specifically the influenza virus, and it is a giant crapshoot. It's a giant crapshoot. Now, There's one more thing I want to point out here. What do recent vaccine effectiveness studies show? Well, vaccine effectiveness studies vary widely across the population. Some studies show that it's 50% effective. Some studies show it's 60% effective. Some studies show that it's less than 9% effective, and it's completely ineffective in children. It's completely ineffective in the elderly. So nobody really has any bearing on whether or not the influenza vaccine is the way to go. But listen, this is Fire Your MD Now, and what we talk about here is the holistic approach, and what everybody overlooks in the greater conversation of the flu and the vaccine is the health of the host. And you know, back in the day when Louis Pasteur came along and discovered that there were, in fact, little microorganisms that could make people sick, this was a giant scientific discovery, there was a huge debate at the time between Louis Pasteur and a gentleman named Beauchamp. And Beauchamp argued that it wasn't the presence of the virus or the bacteria or, you know, the little microorganism that was the problem. It was the condition of the host. And Beauchamp's whole thing was that if the host is healthy, even if there is exposure to the bacteria or the virus, it won't have any place to grow and the body will reject it. And there was this heated debate back and forth between Pasteur and Beauchamp. I mean, it was a big deal back in the day. It was, you know, like the Thriller in Manila. It was a big deal. Everybody was talking about it. It was front page news in scientific circles. It was a heated debate. And on his deathbed, the man who discovered the microbe, Louis Pasteur, said, Beauchamp was right, I was wrong, the terrain is everything. More on. I'm Dr. Peter Glidden. It's Influenza Week here. We're going to be talking about different aspects of the flu all week long here, and thank you for calling. If you've got a couple callers on the line waiting, I'm going to be taking your calls after this segment. And the number to call in, by the way, 866-582-9933. That's 866-582-9933. Now, because medicine and the medical theater in industrialized nations around the world is beholden to the pharmaceutical companies, and because the practice of the science of medicine for the last 100 years has been squarely on the rails of allopathic reductionism, all that the current people in charge of your health care pay any attention to is Louis Pasteur's bug. Nobody pays any attention to the terrain of the human body. Nobody. All of the antidotes for influenza, all of the antidotes for all chronic disease and all acute disease, the treatments are targeted with infectious disease to kill the infectious agent, or to strengthen the immune system of the human body so that when it is exposed to the infectious agent, it will kill it. It's reductionism on steroids, right? Nobody pays any attention at all to the terrain of the organism at all. Even though Louis Pasteur recanted to the chagrin of the pharmaceutical companies, you know, the pharmaceutical concerns at that time, man, they took Pasteur's life work and ran with it. And do you think when on his deathbed he says, no, you don't have to worry about the bug, you should worry about the health of the organism? Because as any gardener will tell you, if the soil is no good, ain't nothing gonna grow in it. And if the soil is good, every plant and every weed in the world's gonna grow in it. The terrain is everything. Now, you know, the metaphor works reverse when it comes to human health, because the human body has wisdom. And when the human body is in a state of health, then it takes a tremendous amount of stress, in this case bacterial or viral stress, in order to upset the apple cart, knock the body out of its homeostasis, out of its state of balance, and then produce a symptom. But nobody is talking about this in the world of medical science, because everybody is looking for the next designer drug that's going to kill the influenza virus. Good luck. I mean, how's that working for you so far? Tomorrow we're going to talk about, among other things, the historical effectiveness of homeopathic medicine against influenza, and those statistics are going to blow your mind. Tomorrow it's all about the homeopathic relationship between human health, the influenza virus, and things that you can do, and some historical anecdotes. Not anecdotes, actual historical cases of massive pandemics of influenza, which were almost 100% positively affected by homeopathy. Don't miss tomorrow's show if you're a homeopathy enthusiast. Now, the thing about this is, right, from the CDC even admits that the current use of vaccinations, the way that the vaccinations are manufactured, the guesswork that goes into it, how they're distributed, and the economic relationship between the pharmaceutical companies and governments, the CDC will admit that all of that stuff interferes with developing a brand, an effective treatment, because it's just not effective. And later on in the show, I'm going to be talking about a Canadian study that was done, which completely underlines this fact that the effectiveness of the influenza vaccine should be questioned by the scientific community. It was really a breakthrough study. But even though scientific organizations around the world are starting to question the efficacy of how it's done with the influenza vaccine now, their solution is, well, let's come up with a better methodology, produce a better vaccine. Let's produce a better gun. Let's produce a better pesticide. Instead of unclogging the drain in the pond so that there's good water in and bad water out, no more stagnant water in the pond where mosquitoes live, let's just develop a better pesticide and a better way to disperse the pesticide and kill all the mosquitoes. Who cares about whether the pond is healthy or not? Well, folks, if the pond is healthy and the water's not stagnant, even though there's going to be 1 trillion mosquitoes in the world, a gigatrillion mosquitoes in the world, they're not going to be in your backyard, because mosquitoes breed in stagnant water. If your body is healthy, when your body is healthy, it takes a remarkable amount of stress to knock you over. Someone's got to sneeze right in your face, and even when they do, your body's going to bounce back. I'm going to tell you my own personal story when we come back. So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Peter Glidden. We're going to take a breather here in my... what's the word I want to use? In my, it's not a rant, really. In my little diatribe about influenza, we're going to take a little break and go to the phones to see if we can keep the callers happy. And let me check here. We have Lynn calling in with a question about a persistent illness. Lynn, thanks so much for the call. You are live.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Glidden. I have a family friend, and when she was younger, she had TB, but it's dormant. She's had a heart murmur, and she had a mild heart attack about 1.5 years ago. She stayed sick a lot. Her diagnosis, forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, enteroria, and it was from a sputum test.
Spell that for me.
INTERAREA.
Enteroria. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
And her blood pressure's good. Sometimes her blood sugar's a little low. She has a little bit of gray hair. She has a lot of flu-like symptoms: phlegm, cough, fever, weakness. She is allergic to concrete dust. She knows for sure, but she's sick a lot. She's only 45, and I was wondering, what we could suggest to help her.
Well, this is a peculiar thing, and this really is a nice little segue, into what I was just talking about. When the environment of the human body is... I have a little tickle in my throat. Hold on. Sorry about that. A little cracker I had during the break went down the wrong tube. Okay, so when the human body is healthy, then it's symptom-free. And when the human body is not healthy, it's full of symptoms. And when the root cause of somebody's illness is chronic nutrient deficiencies, then you're kind of stumbling along at this low-grade level of health your whole life, and an environmental stress comes along, a bacterial stress comes along, a viral stress comes along, a political stress comes along, financial stress comes along, the weather changes, and your body gets bowled over by the stress of life, which would just bounce off of it had it been strong and healthy. So given a long-standing kind of low-grade, melancholy, mediocre state of health, the first, second, and third thing to do for the first 90 days is clean the diet up, get on board with the Healthy Start Pack, selenium, and increase your antioxidants. I would get the antioxidants up over 50,000 a day. You can do that with Cell Shield RTQ. You can do that with Triple Treat Chocolate. You can do that with Z-Radical. You can do that by adding green tea, cinnamon, curry powder, walnuts. There's a million ways to get your antioxidant levels over 50,000 a day. And don't forget, the Beyond Tangy Tangerine is going to give you 5,875 ORAC points per 2 scoops. So the Healthy Start Pack, selenium, and some extra add-on to give her an increased antioxidant level of 50,000 a day. That would be a good place to start. Plus avoidance of the 10 bad foods. That's a really good place to start, and that's what I would encourage her to do for 90 days. For 90 days. And one of the things that happens with people who have long-standing illnesses, is that their state of, their reference point is the state of being unwell. They're used to being sick. So, because the peculiar way that the brain is constructed, it's very difficult for the brain to remember negative experiences. The brain wants to forget negative experiences. So I can't tell you how many times I've had people that they come to me, they've got 10 symptoms, and they've had 10 strong symptoms for 20 years, right? And I'll give them a protocol, and they come back 2 months later, and I sit them down and I say, how you doing? They say, oh, doc, I don't feel that much different. And then I say, so I take out the list of their symptoms, and I say, well, what about those headaches that you used to have every afternoon at 2 o'clock? And they kind of look up at me with a surprised look. Oh, yeah, I forgot all about those. Those are gone. Well, what about the nightmares you used to have 3 times a week? And they scratch their head. Geez, I forgot all about those, right? So it's easy for people who have been dealing with a low state of health their entire life to not be aware of the positive changes engendered by medical nutrition. Because rarely with cases like this is it an overnight sensation. Sometimes it is, but it's rare. It's more of a slow and steady wins the race type of a thing. So what I would counsel this person to do is get a piece of paper and, make a bunch of columns on it, like 8 columns on it, and in the first column just list all of their strongest symptoms, headache, fatigue, insomnia, whatever. And then every week, and then give those symptoms a score, out of a range of 10. 10 out of 10 being, oh my God, take me, shoot me in the head right now to relieve my misery. And have them give their symptoms a score once a week. And that way they'll be able to have a visual chart of their improvement or, in fact, their lack of improvement. And we know that never happens, that nothing improves. That's a good thing to do to kind of help people who've been struggling with a chronic thing their entire life keep their fingers on the pulse of their own recovery, because they'll just forget things and they won't think that they're making any progress when, in fact, they are. Does that make sense? I think it probably makes sense. So that's what I would do. I would do the Healthy Start Pack, the selenium, and the increasing her antioxidants to over 50,000 a day. And everybody gets on board with eliminating the 10 bad foods from their diet. Okay, everybody has to eliminate the 10 bad foods. So give that a try, Lynn, and thank you so much for the call. All right. So the number, by the way, to call me, ladies and gentlemen, 866-582-9933. That's 866-582-9933. There's another thing I'd like to talk about relative to the flu. You know, I don't know if you've ever spent any time around lawyers, but in the wonderful world of lawyer land, there's a term referred to as legalese. Legalese. It's that technical run-on sentence language that lawyers use, wherein words that you and I use, that lawyers use, don't mean the same thing to a court of law that we think that they mean, right? And Bill Clinton was one of the most famous gave one of the most famous examples of that when he was being cross-examined about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. He was quoted, I believe the quote goes, well, and I quote, this is Bill Clinton speaking, well, depends on what is means. Clinton was kind of dodging the issue by asking in legal terms what the word is meant. Right? So my point here is that words are very curious things, and words really have a very specific meaning in the wonderful world of law and the wonderful world of medicine. How well a vaccine works can be measured through different kinds of studies. There are randomized studies, and there are observational studies. Randomized studies are where you take a group of people, 500 people, and you randomly assign some of them to get the drug or the treatment and some of them to get placebo, and it's randomly done. That's the best type of a study. What's even better, if it's done with humans, is if the person who's randomizing the group and who's in charge of the whole study has no idea what they're studying. That's called a double blind. That's when the person conducting the study has no idea what, in fact, they're studying, and which vial has the good stuff and which vial has the placebo. It's called a double blind. You don't need to do a double blind with animals, ostensibly, because that's a complicated subject. But in any event, so there's a randomized study where you have a group of people and you divide them randomly into two groups, and then you randomly give the people in those groups either the medicine or the placebo. And that's the best type of study. It's called the gold standard of scientific testing. And when you do a randomized study, the results are referred to as the efficacy of the treatment, the efficacy of the treatment. An observational study is where you just look at two groups of people in the world, one group of people who has taken the medicine and one group of people who has decided on their own not to take the medicine, not in any type of a controlled clinical setting, just in the population at large. The problem with an observational study is that it's not randomized. So, it might be that the entire group of people who chose not to take the medicine were all vegetarians, or they were all women, or they were all, young men in their 20s. Whereas the people who chose to take the medicine were this broad cross-section of humanity. So observational studies are not nearly as sensitive or specific, give as good results as randomized studies do. And when you do an observational study, the term that's used with an observational study is the effectiveness. So there are two terms here, the efficacy and the effectiveness. And you will, now that you know these two terms, when you're listening to the news, when you're reading reports in Time magazine, which I don't recommend anybody read because Time magazine did this scathing, blasphemous, prejudicial report on homeopathy 10 years ago. I mean, it was unbelievably poor journalism, and because of that one study, I will never buy another Time magazine as long as I live. All right, it was bad. But you'll read, we're in, USA Today or whatever it is that you're reading, about studies done with the flu vaccine, and you will never, ever, ever see the word efficacy. You will always see the word effectiveness. And in the world of clinical research, effectiveness is low down on the ladder, and efficacy is way high up on the ladder. The reason that they don't do these studies is partly because of humanitarian reasons, kind of, sort of, but I think it's because they don't really want to know whether the drug is effective or not because they've invested $1 billion in it. They don't really want to know what the efficacy of the treatment is, and the argument from the scientific community is, well, we can't not give the vaccine to people because everybody needs the vaccine. So it would be unethical to withhold the vaccine from a certain group of people and then watch them get sick. That's their whole argument. And I can potentially see their point of view if I thought, in fact, that the vaccine was effective. But again, everybody misses the point. And the point is that, is it the virus? Is it the virus that's the thing, or is it the health of the host? Why do you think that the vaccine is ineffective in the elderly? Because the elderly, their health is in the crapper. They're on 18 prescription medications a day. They've been eating all the wrong food their entire life, all of the time. And they have the worst health of practically anybody. And in children under 2, the immune systems haven't developed. Their systems are still developing. Their body is not mature, inside nor outside. And so it doesn't have the wherewithal to be able to handle the stress of life. They are, the fields of their bodies are weak a priori, and that gives the viral stress a really excellent place to feed and breed. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Peter Glidden with a live edition of Fire Your MD Now. It's flu week all week. We're talking about influenza, so if you have anybody in your life who is suffering with this or has questions about it, then have them call my show, and I'll talk them through science-based, clinically verified methods of things that we can do to support and strengthen the entire system of the body, not just the immune system, the entire system of the body during cold and flu season. Right now we're going back to the phones. James is calling in with a question about stomach issues. Welcome aboard, James. You are live.
Yes, Dr. Glidden.
Hey, James, what's happening?
It's like I think I got possibly gallbladder stones, and I was wondering what caused them, and what I can do to get rid of them.
All right, so gallstones is an interesting thing, and, you either do have gallstones or you don't. The problem with the abdomen is there are millions of nerves in the abdomen, and you can get referred symptoms. It's not the easiest thing in the world to diagnose an abdominal set of signs and symptoms. It could be anything, right? Maybe it's a gallstone. It's easy to diagnose a gallstone, so what you want to do is go to some medical professional, hopefully not an MD. Go to a chiropractor or a naturopath if you live in a state that licenses naturopathic medicine, and have somebody order a an ultrasound, a high-definition ultrasound of the gallbladder. An ultrasound is all you need. You don't need a CT scan. You don't need an X-ray. You don't need an upper GI with barium. You need a high-definition ultrasound. Even a normal ultrasound of the gallbladder will be enough to show whether you have stones or not. Now, stones, the gallbladder, by the way, is this little tiny bag. It's about the size of your, little bit smaller than your fist, about 3/4 the size of your fist, and it hangs underneath and in back of the liver, underneath and in back of the liver, and it's the gallbladder's job to collect bile. Bile is a digestive enzyme that the liver makes, and it collects in the gallbladder, and then the gallbladder, of course, is connected to the small intestine through a little tube called the common bile duct. And through a set of nerves and sensory transmissions, and God only knows what other mechanisms, when food enters a certain part of the intestinal tract, the bile is stimulated the gallbladder is stimulated to squirt out some bile. And it does, and the bile enters the small intestine, and it's the bile that facilitates digestion. Bile is very important for digestion, especially the digestion of fat. It's very important for digestion, especially the digestion of fat. Now, when you get gallstones, the bile in that little gallbladder bag hanging under the liver, some of it has crystallized and solidified into little stones. And, they can be as small as the eye of a crab, and they can be big as a rock. They can be as big as a marble. Sometimes gallstones can get quite large. But gallstones are soluble. They dissolve in bile. Imagine that. That's what they're made from. They dissolve in bile. So when someone has gallstones, what we need to do is to get their body to secrete more bile. And quite frankly, the reason that the stones formed in the first place, from our point of view, is because the liver wasn't secreting enough bile. It just wasn't doing enough. So what do? We support and promote the health of the liver. And when we support and promote the health of the liver, it'll produce more bile. Because when the liver is healthy, it produces exactly the right amount of bile that it needs. And when the gallbladder has the right amount of bile in it, over time the stones that are present will get dissolved just by the presence of the bile. So, to support and promote the health of the liver, here's what I recommend. One healthy start pack per 100 pounds of body weight per month. 1 bottle of selenium per 50 pounds of body weight per month, stopping at 4 bottles. Quite frankly, I'm assuming this is for you. I'd take 4 bottles of the selenium a month. By the way, James, how much do you weigh?
A little over 200 pounds.
All right, so we're running up against the heartbreak man. So here's the recipe. Per month, 2 healthy start packs, 4 bottles of selenium, and complete avoidance of the 10 bad foods. So go to my website, sign up for my free newsletter, and you'll get a list of the 10 bad foods. I don't even want you to look at the foods that are on that are listed there. You have to eliminate all 10 of those bad foods. Take 2 healthy start packs a month and 4 bottles of selenium a month and see what happens. Give it 90 days. I'm Dr. Peter Glidden, taking your calls and more flu stuff when we come back.